always thinking about these things, because to me life is very precious. It's very special. We're here for such a short time that everything on this earth should have a reason, should have a beneficial purpose. And I feel like everything does, except for fleas. You know? Fleas do nothing at all beneficial. I always thought at times like this when we can't figure it out for ourselves, wouldn't it be great if we could just pick up the phone and call up God and ask him these things? Just pick up the phone and call up God. Yeah, hi, God. This is Ellen. Ellen. Listen, there are certain things on this earth I just don't understand why they're here. No, not Charo. No. But there are certain things, like insects. I was thinking more about fleas. They seem to have no benefit. No, I didn't realize how many people were employed by the flea collar industry. Not to mention sprays. Well, yeah, I guess you're right.
Andrew is the victim that we have never seen. He is really beaten by jiggers. You talk about being beaten silly, and here is someone who is beaten silly by jiggers. They have spray, and actually what was going to happen is that Andrew would die. He is in the last stages. Angalia huku Andrew. Ulisema ati hauna familia. Hebu ongea vizuri tusikie. Osema kitu ni kuchukua kwa video hii. Nyumbani unaishi na nani?
Mwangalia Samson.
Unaishi na nani? Samson ni ndugu yako ama ni nani? Andrew has nobody to take care of him, and that is what normally happens. When you are alone, the jiggers will come over and be your brothers, and of course they are not a very good brother. So he finds it hard, even just washing his own body. It is so hard, and he's so filled up with tons and tons of jiggers. I'm thinking that his case is so severe, it would take like 20 visits or more to have everything done. And we've just started this. We had to really organize ourselves well before beginning this. And it's so painful even just washing his body, doing it with medicated soap. And it is so hard. Jiggers are formed colonies, and as they're washed, they just some jiggers just fall off with the scales. We haven't had this encounter in the 5 years I've handled jiggers. I'm thinking that this is the worst affliction ever. And we just got up with a case that was severe enough to kill somebody. And looking at his eyes, the eyes are so pale, and he is so anemic. He has no blood in him. And this is the very last stage of the affliction before jiggers, take somebody to the grave. So at least we caught up with him. At least we will do everything we can to prevent that from happening. And we thank God for this chance.
Now, one of the great proponents of the evolution theory today is, of course, the world-famous Richard Dawkins. And he wrote the famous book, The God Delusion, where he bemoans the fact that religion should have had such a prominent place in the history of mankind. And it seems to me that he misinterprets religion in the sense that he looks at certain denominations with certain denominational views rather than the biblical view. Nevertheless, he also belongs to an organization known as the Brights. Now, it's an interesting name. To be bright means to be intelligent, means to be a luminary, means to have light. Now, what does it take to be a bright? So if we go to their webpage, we find that a bright is someone who believes that there is no God. So it seems you have to be incredibly intelligent to reach the point where you realize that there is no God. And it's interesting that the constituency of brights is usually hugely diverse. Besides those, of course, who identify themselves as atheists or humanists or secular humanists or free thinkers or rationalists, naturalists, agnostics, skeptics, whatever, there are individuals who go by their preferred affiliations, such as ethical culturalist, pantheist, Buddhist, yogi, Wiccan, transhumanist, Unitarian. Well, that's odd already, but then it gets really interesting. Also part of the gamut of constituents are Jews, Catholics, Quakers, Episcopalians, and others who may personally maintain their religious, cultural, or aesthetic aspect, but not its supernaturalism. So it seems that you can belong to a Christian grouping, either Catholic or Protestant, or any one of the others, and still be a bright. In other words, you can believe there is no God, but you can be part of a denomination. So you don't embrace any of the supernatural aspects. You're just a cultural Christian. You like the culture of Christianity. Now, that's rather fascinating. So you can be a bright and not believe in God. In fact, in our country, where I come from, there was a massive debate because there were theologians and preachers preaching from the pulpit who didn't believe in God. And some of the people were, well, upset about this issue and tried to do something about it, but it is their human right to have their belief. And so some of these people are fully employed by churches, but they don't believe in God. So we're living in interesting times. Now, when they started this evolution weekend, they also decided to make it pretty public, and they put advertisements on London buses where they claimed there's probably no God, so, relax and enjoy life. Now, originally they wanted to place the advertisement, there is no God, but because that was offensive to some, they compromised on there is probably no God, which is a misnomer in itself. And then they also put up posters claiming, in the beginning, man created God. There's probably no God. So this is where we are in the stream of time, and why has it come to this point? And why is there such obvious disbelief in the issues of the Bible? Now, Charles Darwin, when he accepted this position as naturalist for the voyage of the Beagle, he was, of course, theologically trained, but he also was a biologist, and his grandfather had dabbled in evolutionary thinking, and on this trip he had a book with him by Charles Lyell, The Principles of Geology, which postulated long ages. And as he was traveling around, he came to certain conclusions, and he wrote to his friend, Dr. Asa Gray, I'm bewildered. I had no intention to write atheistically, but I own that I cannot see so plainly as others do and as I wish to do. Evidence for design and beneficence on all sides of us. Doesn't look so good. There seems to me too much misery in the world. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae, that's a category of parasites, with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars, or that a cat should play with mice. So when I look at the natural world around me, I see suffering. I see animals parasiting other animals. I see carnivores killing their prey, tearing them apart. This is not a utopian world. This doesn't match the theory or the story in the Bible. And we have to admit he has a point. But perhaps he missed something. In 1844, in his first draft of his famous book, The Origin of Species, he comes out a little stronger and he says it's derogatory that the creator of countless universes should have made by individual acts of his will the myriads of creeping parasites and worms which since the earliest dawn of life have swarmed over the land and the depth of the ocean. So this is a bad picture we're painting of God by looking at nature. Then he ponders his evolutionary paradigm and he says, well, if we look at evolution, well, then we cease to be astonished that a group of animals should have been transformed to lay their eggs in the bowels and flesh of other sensitive beings, that some animals should live by and delight in cruelty, that animals should be led away by false instincts, that annually there should be an incalculable waste of pollen, eggs, and immature beings. So looking at it from the evolutionary paradigm made sense to him. The two don't match. And Darwin saw this. And this is the very basis, the very seed of the theory of evolution. But did he perhaps miss something? Let's have a look at the scriptures again. The scriptures surely tell us that from the original perfect state, something changed. So we need to have a look at that. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard the voice in the garden and I was afraid. Here was something new, fear. And I was naked. Here was something new. And I hid myself and I said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldst not eat? And the man said, The woman you gave me, it's her problem. She created the problem. And I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, It's the serpent's fault. He beguiled me. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field, and upon the belly thou shalt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. So something strange happens here. The serpent is cursed. Not the perpetrators, the serpent. Now the serpent, of course, was just a medium used by the other entity who was known as Satan, and he used this medium to beguile them. And as a reference point and an indicator for future generations, a curse was placed upon the serpent, and it was now to crawl on its belly. So I can assume that prior to this, it did not crawl on its belly. Now, if I look at the reptile world, you have lizards and reptiles that have vastly reduced legs. You have some that are totally legless. The serpents are generally legless, but some of them actually have rudimentary legs, and some of them develop them embryologically, but they do not come to the forefront. So something obviously changed. But here is the hub. If there are legs and they are perfectly formed, just rudimentary, then do they have the genes for legs, yes or no? Obviously they must have the genes, otherwise they couldn't have the structure. So why are they rudimentary? Did it take millions of years of evolution? Is this progress or is this regression? Is it a step back or is it a step forward? And so we can see that nothing new has been added, only something has been lost or deactivated. If you look at other structures, which evolutionists would claim developed over millions of years, like the apparatus to kill, the poison glands and the teeth associated with it, well, the poison glands are really transformed salivary glands. So if you have a transformed gland that produces enzymes, which are proteins, well, that wouldn't be a problem if they ended in your stomach and you could digest the protein, but if the protein ended up in your bloodstream, it could create a tremendous reaction. an immune response. And so this is not something that was added. This is not some new invention. This is a transformation of something that already existed. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife. I don't know if there's a lesson in there which we should take note of. And hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. Here again, the first curse is upon the serpent as a reminder. The second curse is not upon Adam and Eve, but upon the ground, and for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Now the herb of the field was originally the food for the animals, and the fruit and the seeds, the nuts, the grains, and all of these issues were for man. So now the herbs are added, so we could say vegetables were added to the diet. Obviously, there would be a shortage because of the curse, which had to be augmented with the additional food. And then what happened? In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. So here was the sentence of death. It was delayed, but it would be implemented over time through aging, and dust they were, dust they would become. So the earth is cursed. What does this mean? Obviously it means it won't bring forth what it did before. And whereas before everything grew effortlessly, now it took labor and sweat to produce the same. And why? For their sake. Well, you know, if I look at the world today, if everything is honky-dory and the rains come when they should come and the crops are growing as they should and the wind comes at the right time for pollination, everybody is complacent and happy and nobody needs God. But let the droughts come and the withering winds, and let the crops deteriorate, then everybody turns to God, so that he shouldn't be forgotten, because if you forget the source of life, well, then you might have to forfeit life. So this was a reminder that man was still dependent on a higher power in order to subsist on the land. All right, and the structures were changed. Thorns and thistles would henceforth be part of this creation. So I assume that before, thorns and thistles were not part of this creation, because they were to be a bothersome intruder in the cultivation process that Adam had to undertake. Now, what are thorns? Are these new structures? No. There's no new genetic material here. A thorn is merely a transformed branch or a cortical outgrowth. And in the case of the spines on a cactus, they are a transformed leaf. And instead of the genetic material unfolding the leaf structure as it develops, it folds in upon itself. So it's a different expression of the same gene. And instead of the stem developing like a stem, it flattens out and develops like a leaf as a water conservation measure. So obviously this was not required in a perfect world. This is a post-perfect world addition, but there's no new genetic material. So this is not evolution. This is a regression. If we take the thorns of a rose, for example, they are epidermal or cortical outgrowths. Now, every human being can experience that if they want to. They can start taking a spade and dig around in the garden to cultivate the ground, and eventually, if they do it enough, what happens to their hands? They develop calluses. But this is not evolution, this is a response to pressure, and the genetic structure is then programmed to add new material to protect the hand. So that is not an evolutionary process, it is an enactment of pre-existing genetic information. The same with the thistle. It is the transformed petal of a flower that is stiffened and becomes dry and hard and prickly. So this is not new genetic material, so you cannot really term it evolution at all. So far, we haven't seen any evolution, but only transformation and regression. Now, Darwin made a point of using parasites to explain his theory. So let's have a look at parasites. What are parasites? Parasites are creatures that feed and live off other creatures while hijacking, as it were, their metabolic machinery, mostly not killing them, but sapping them of their strength. And if we look at the parasites, like the roundworms and the tapeworms that we have over here, these are creatures that are highly regressed in their structure. A tapeworm doesn't have eyes, doesn't need eyes, you can't see anything in the alimentary canal of another creature. It doesn't have a digestive system. Why should it have one? It's living in your digestive system, so it hijacks your digestive system. So the eyes are not there, the digestive structures are not there, and so parasites are reduced organisms. Is that evolution? Or is that the deactivation of the loss of genetic material? Now, here is a barnacle. A barnacle is really a crab-like little creature that has a little shell around it, but not all the barnacles are sessile, sitting on rocks. Some of them are actually free-swimming little organisms that are parasites on crabs. Now, when such a parasite becomes involved in a crab structure, it develops within the crab, and it's called an interna inside, and it is like a tumor growing in the organism. Eventually, this is what happens. This is the female cyprid. It invades crabs, and that develops into a parasite with internal root system, which is internal. And once the interna matures, it will develop a reproductive body outside of the crab. So this is not the crab's reproductive body, this is a parasite. Fascinating. And inside, there are just these strands which have grown into the crab and sap the crab of its energy and nutrients, and the parasite uses it just to create these reproductive structures. And then the little males come and they fertilize these eggs on the outside, and then when the eggs develop, they become part of the plankton system, and the whole system starts all over again. So this is a disgusting looking parasite, consisting of nothing else but strands throughout this living crab, and then the reproductive system. But the interesting thing is, it has a free-living form, which is part of the plankton system, where it feeds like any other creature. And it has all the structures that it needs to live. It has eyes, it has a mouth, it has movement capabilities, it has digestive systems. It's a complete creature. So here's my question. In this disgusting-looking parasite that consists of strands and a reproductive system, are the genes for eyes and mouths and reproductive systems and locomotory organs, are they all there? Yes or no? Sure, they must be there, because the larva has them. And then when the larva invades a crab, they all disappear. How did that happen? Is that evolution? Darwin, is that millions of years of evolution? Or the fact that it is now in the crab gives the environmental signals to the genetic systems, marks them, and deactivates the genes by wrapping them around the histone proteins, deactivating, and all the structures that normally constitute a living organism disappear, and what remains is the strandy organism and a reproductive system. That's all it needs. That's all it needs. So is this evolution? No. This is deactivation of gene patterns. And why should it be necessary? Well, if you have a world that has become what it is today, changed from what it was in its time of perfection to imperfection, food sources disappear, well, then animals have two choices. If their food source disappears, they either go extinct or they change their food source. And so parasitism is just one of the avenues, but it doesn't mean when it was good, when it was very good, that these creatures were designed to be parasites. They're just a reminder of what has become of the world owing to the situation described in the book of Genesis. So let's look at some other creatures which are parasites. The mosquito. The mosquito is a bloodsucker, and it can draw with the apparatus that it has, which is like a mini drill, this proboscis. It can drill holes into your skin and suck the blood. But then fortuitously, it has enzymes which prevent the coagulation of the blood. Obviously, if you were to have the blood coagulate in that little straw, that would become a very complicated sucking experience. You'd have a clogged apparatus. So these chemicals prevent the clotting of blood. Now, this must have taken millions of years to develop, right? Well, the interesting thing is, it's only the female that sucks blood and not the male. And he has the same structure and he has the same chemical composition in his structure, but what does he use it for? Well, he uses it to suck plant juices. Now, obviously, this is enough to satisfy his needs, so he does not need to suck blood. But if the plant juice does not provide for him or to the female everything that is necessary to produce the eggs and all the energy that goes into that, augmentation of the diet with another fluid rich in nutrients would be very advantageous. So they switched. But if the food supply had still been what it was originally, then there would have been no need to switch, and there wouldn't have been a parasite, and the animal wouldn't have been a pest, and it wouldn't have transmitted diseases. So it could have been very good, but what we have now is a changed paradigm. This is the New Zealand key parrot. It's a little parrot, and it has a sharp little beak, and it has claws like any other bird, and its diet is the root of a particular tree. Except when, through urbanization, they removed the trees from the areas, and suddenly this little bird became a killing machine. And it was fascinating what it ate. It went and sat on the back of sheep, attached itself to the wall, and then with this sharp little beak dug its way through the back until it got to the fat around the kidney, and it ate the fat around the kidney, and the sheep died. And of course, that created great consternation. Now, imagine that some virus or disease had destroyed the original food source of this creature, then it would have been a killer. And if Darwin had come to Australia and New Zealand, and he had found these creatures and seen their carnivorous habits, he would have said, well, with a sharp beak like that, it's obviously through evolution that it was transformed into a creature that had become a killing machine. But when they replanted the trees, what happened? Went back to its original diet. So original and current do not necessarily tell the same story. So if the earth was cursed and much of the plant material disappeared, then creatures would have to eat something else. That's pretty logical. Now, if you look at the paleontological record, you will find that in the paleontology there are vastly more varieties of plants than we have today. So there must have been food sources which are no longer available, which means that the animals that used to eat them either changed their diet or disappeared. If you look at chipmunks, we all know what their diet is. It consists of seeds. But today, if the forest is depleted of food sources, they will be found eating roadkill, for example. Now, surely that is not their original diet. This is a new development owing to environmental changes which have taken place. Isaiah chapter 65 verse 17 says, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered nor come to mind." So the Old Testament says that that which we see now, which Darwin saw, is going to be transformed back to what it was. And then this pain and this suffering will be over, because the creatures were not willingly subjected to this, but as a consequence of the actions. The New Testament says the same thing, 2 Peter, "Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness," which means that the character, the image of God will be restored. So this is the hope of the Scriptures, whether it was Old Testament or whether it was New Testament. "For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the Son of God," says Paul. "For the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him that has subjected the same in hope, because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now." I wonder whether Darwin looked at this text in the right context, because he was bemoaning the fact that everything is suffering. But here is a reason given. And the changes do not have to take place over millions of years. Isaiah chapter 11 verses 6 to 9, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child will lead them. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Is this an improbable story? Or is it a possibility? That's all I'm asking. If, according to the evidence, it is a possibility, then we should be allowed to make a choice based on the information. And that choice should be, I choose to believe what the Scriptures say, because the evidence is not overwhelming that it is not as it is stated there. We should have that freedom of choice. God gives us freedom of choice. And this is the purpose of this lecture, to give people a choice. We can choose to wear the glasses of Darwin, or we can choose to wear the glasses of faith. And the one is not necessarily superior to the other. Now, when the Scriptures say that the child will play with the serpent, I assume that this will not be the situation. Obviously, this serpent won't have the diet that it has now, and also the disposition that it has now. So this I would not consider safe. But the new serpent, where the gene systems are activated according to the original pattern, will be a different story. Now, I wonder what it will be like in a world where there is harmony between man and animal and nature again. I mean, every human being longs for something that the soul cannot generate by itself. And there's nothing like association with wild animals. People love to see them. They fear them, but they would love to reach out and touch them. Now, when these animals are returned to their original state, I think this is what we will see. This man has this lion in this cage, and he's going to open the cage to have a chat to his lion. Let's see the response. I think it is our choice whether we want to believe that God created this world and that He created man in His image and put him in command of all the creatures on this planet. And it is our choice to believe whether God will restore relationships so that they reflect what we have just seen, or whether we want to go the evolutionary route. The choice is yours.